Hi and welcome back. So in the two previous video we introduced and examined monopoly as well as monopolistic competition. We also explored the short-run equilibrium of the firm under monopoly. So in this video we explore further implications of the monopolistic market structure. The first thing we're going to do is to make a comparison of monopoly and imperfect competition with perfect competition. So firstly, we're going to compare monopoly with perfect competition. Analytically, the only valid comparison is between the long-run equilibrium of a perfectly competitive industry or market and a monopoly. This suggests, in other words, that we compare a monopoly with a situation that would have prevailed if there had been a large number of firms producing the product under conditions of perfect competition. Moreover, the comparison must pertain to the long run, since all possible adjustment can be made only in the long run. So we'll see after our analysis that if the industry is a monopoly, the price would be higher and output lower than if perfect competition prevailed, simply because a monopoly can control price and can basically increase price and reduce the amount of goods produced. In our figure here, the marginal cost represents the marginal cost of the industry, while market demand curve is represented by the average revenue curve, which is this one. So under perfect competition, the industry or market supply curve is obtained by adding all the individual supply curves. That is the rising parts of the marginal cost curve of all the firms in the industry. So for a perfectly competitive industry, marginal cost can therefore be regarded as the industry's supply curve or the market supply curve, S. Hence here we show the S together with the marginal cost. So the equilibrium price and quantity are determined by the intersection of the supply, which is also the marginal cost, and the demand, which is also the average revenue here. So the equilibrium under perfect competition is indicated here at EC. That is the price of PC and the quantity of QC as well. And if you can see, you can look very well, for the same cost and demand conditions, the equilibrium of the monopolist is at price PM and the quantity is at QM. So if the industry is a monopoly, the price will therefore be higher and the output will be lower than if it were a perfect competition. So this basically tells us that in actual fact, monopoly is an inefficient market structure. So this is because the monopolist produces less, employs fewer resources, charges a higher price than society would prefer, and does not produce at the lowest possible cost per unit of output. However, something that we need to note or bear in mind is that this conclusion is based on the assumption that the cost conditions are the same for a single large producer as for a large number of small producers. So if one large firm can produce a product, for instance, a motor car, more cheaply than a large number of small producers, the monopoly is not necessarily inefficient in that regard. So there are some misconceptions about monopoly that needs our attention. So this includes, for instance, that it is often claimed that monopolies can charge virtually any price it wants. However, this is not necessarily true. So like any other firm, monopolies is constrained by the demand for its product. So a monopolistic firm cannot sell whatever it wants at any price it decides to set anyhow. A related claim is that the monopolist will charge the highest price it can get. So this is also not true. So the monopolist will set the price for its product at a level that will maximize total profit, not at the highest possible price it can charge. So another one is that many people believe that the monopoly guarantees economic profit. That is in the short run and in the long run. However, as you pointed out earlier, monopolies can also make a loss. Whether monopolies make a profit or a loss depends on the demand for the product, the cost structure of the firm, and its pricing and output decisions. In fact, when demand for its product falls drastically, a monopolistic can a monopolistic firm can be forced to close down and be pushed out of business. There is also a popular belief that once a profitable monopoly is established, its position is virtually unquestionable and that it therefore has almost absolute economic power. So this is not the necessarily true also. So even a monopolist must always consider potential competition from firms producing products that may become substitute for its product if the price increases. So an example of this is that if the price of electricity is pushed up too high, consumers may switch to wood, paraffin, coal, petrol, solar, and wind, and other energy resources. Okay, so the next step is to examine some of the arguments against monopoly and the counter argument of those who defend the existence of monopoly. So we should note that many of the arguments apply for all large, powerful firms, whether or not they are the sole supplier of goods or services. For instance, the most powerful corporations in South Africa produce hundreds of different goods and services, which are sold in a large number of markets, in which they can compete with other firms. Their financial strength, however, often gives them similar advantages to those they would have if they were the sole supplier of the goods and services in the concerned market. So the first one is that, as we have seen, monopoly output is lower than the perfectly competitive output, and monopoly prices are higher than perfectly competitive prices. This is for a given set of cost and demand conditions. So monopoly makes goods scarcer and more expensive, holding other factors constant, than they would have been if the industry were competitive. And this results in an inefficient allocation of resources, rather. So this conclusion is valid, however, only if the monopolist cost structure is the same as that of a competitive structure. One of the reasons for the existence of monopoly is that it permits economies of scale. So if one firm can produce a product at a lower cost than a number of small independent firms, then monopoly is not necessarily inefficient, and it can be beneficial. Secondly, critics of monopoly often argue that there is little or no incentive for innovation or technological improvement under monopoly. So since there is no competition, management may decide to take things easy, avoiding the risk associated with innovation. However, it may be argued that only large firms have the resources required for significant innovation. So it is also argued that although a patent gives the holder a monopoly, it also stimulates innovation. For example, why would a firm spend time and money on the development of new product or ideas if it can be copied by a rival firm? So those who argue for monopoly state that the patent is actually going to stimulate innovation because other firms will have to be forced to produce their own research and output. Another argument against monopoly is that it leads to managerial inefficiency. So under perfect competition, all firms are forced to produce as cheaply as possible to avoid bankruptcy. But monopolies are not forced to be efficient. So if there is no competition, then inefficient, high-cost firms can basically survive under those conditions. So economists call this an X inefficient, and it occurs, for example, if managers have other goals that conflict with cost minimization. The counter argument is that monopolists are always subject to potential or indirect competition from firms in other industries. which try to develop substitute product or form firms in other countries that are going to act as a competition. A related complaint is that monopolies do not pay sufficient attention to quality of their products or their services to customers. So the classic example are state monopolies like ESCOM, for instance, that leave consumers with little choice but to accept poor products and services. And the counter argument is that the increase in competition can improve services and in the image of monopolistic or firms that act as a monopoly. There are also critics that argue that monopoly gives rise to an unfair or socially unacceptable distribution of income and wealth. So they argue that monopolies make substantial economic profits, which accrue to their owners or shareholders at the expense of consumers who have to pay high prices for the product. The counter argument is that much of the profit is reinvested in the economy and that the profits are required to finance continued economic growth. The last argument is that monopolies tend to engage in rent-seeking behavior. So this refers to activities designed to transfer income or wealth to a particular firm or resource supplier at someone else's or on the society's expense. So since a monopolist can earn economic profit in the long run, there is an incentive for monopolists and aspiring monopolists to do everything in their power to acquire or maintain monopoly privilege granted by the government. For instance, in the form of an inclusive franchise or license. They often spend large amounts of legal fees, lobbying and public relations advertising to persuade government to grant or sustain their privileged positions. Rent-seeking expenditures therefore raises cost without adding anything to firms' output and are therefore socially wasteful. What is then our conclusion after covering this? Do we conclude that monopoly is a good thing or a bad thing? So, on balance, it is difficult to give an unqualified answer, but the burden of proof is on those who defend monopoly. As we have seen, monopoly is subject to certain inherent inefficiencies, and there is always a possibility that monopolists will abuse their economic power. However, there are also no any guarantees that the potential advantages of monopoly will be realized or passed on to consumers. It is not surprising, therefore, that most of the government do not simply allow monopolies to do whatever they like. Hence, in South Africa, institutions like the Competition Commission. Okay, so let's end it here for now. And in the next video, we're going to look at the remaining market structures, which are monopolistic competition and oligopoly, looking at them versus perfect competition. All right, thank you.